students experiencing homelessness and the Child Find process for young children across the state. So I'm excited to be working with Karen and Christine regarding that piece of my new position.
Okay, so we are going to get started just kind of giving some context and background regarding young children and homelessness. Probably this will not be new information to you, but we just kind of want to set the stage for where we're going to go with talking about strategies for supporting students. Almost half of all children in homeless shelters are under the age of 6, and more than 150,000 very young children stay in shelters each year, and even more are sharing housing with others due to economic hardship. And in Wisconsin, we really see that the majority of the students that are identified under McKinney-Vento are students who are sharing housing, who are doubled up due to economic hardship or similar reasons.
Good morning, this is Janie.
So a person in the US is most likely to experience homelessness in the first year of life.
Let me give them a call, okay? Okay, hold on, just hang tight.
And a person is most likely to experience homelessness between ages 1 and 5. So we really are seeing that young children are affected by homelessness, and we really need to think about how we're supporting them and what that means for them in terms of school readiness and how to best support them through our programming.
Okay, I'll tell her that. She's just panicked.
Put another note out there that please mute yourselves. We're getting some feedback and can hear other people talking.
Good. I will tell her that. It was a different bus. Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Again, just a reminder to mute yourselves, please.
Oops.
They can all hear you.
Oh.
Okay, so moving on to our data slide. This is some information from the HMIS data. So that's homelessness in general through shelters and through continuums of care in our state. And this just talks about what we had just mentioned in terms of infancy and early childhood is the age at which a person is most likely to live in a U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development shelter or in a HUD shelter. Again, you can see the numbers are highest for kids in that 0 to 5 age bracket. And this data comes from the U.S. Department of Ed regarding children under 6 years old. So the total population in our state of children under age 6 is 405,912. And of that, the estimated number experiencing homelessness is 18,006, or 1 in 23 children under the age of 6 experiencing homelessness. And we know that children experiencing homelessness are less likely to access early education programs. And this is really for a variety of reasons. They really confront more barriers to accessing programming than low-income families with stable housing. So we have really been able to see that homelessness is a greater barrier than poverty alone when it comes to accessing early education programming. So some of those barriers that students experiencing homelessness face to accessing these early education programs is lack of documentation, so birth certificates, things like that, high mobility, lack of transportation, waiting lists, lack of awareness, and really just kind of some of those barriers that we also see when students enter our K-12 system. And families who are experiencing homelessness who stay with other people, so who are doubled up, face additional barriers. They are often not as well connected to school resources or don't want to make that as known to jeopardize the housing of the people that they're sharing housing with.
All right, and we also know that public schools and Head Start programs have enrolled more young children experiencing homelessness in recent years. So national data shows that public schools and Head Start programs have seen a 9% increase in children experiencing homelessness in their preschool programs from, that was in 2015-16, so from the previous year. And we know those numbers are only increasing into this current year. And Head Start has seen a 5% increase of students in Head Start and early Head Start programs. from the previous year as well that the data shows. So we know that this population is growing, and that young children, even if they're not in our public school system yet necessarily, are experiencing homelessness at greater rates. And we know that a lot of you know this, but research shows that homelessness hurts the health, development, and education of young children. So experiences of homelessness and housing instability, mobility in early childhood are associated with delays in child's language, social emotional development. Children experiencing homelessness begin Head Start behind their low-income peers. So we know that homelessness is affecting young children and other students as well, but young children more significantly than poverty or just being low income is affecting other young children. The longer a child experiences homelessness, the more that negative health outcomes are magnified, and can cause lifelong effects on the family, on communities. And so we just know that things are compounded and affect more than just that child. And then homelessness in early childhood is correlated with poor classroom engagement and social skills in early elementary school as well. So the achievement gap between children that are experiencing homelessness and their low-income peers in elementary school tends to persist and widen. So again, we want to focus on that achievement in the long run of children experiencing homelessness. Children that have ever been homeless, so not even that they're currently experiencing homelessness in schools, but that they've ever had an experience of homelessness, have an increased risk for suspension, expulsion, identification for special education. So we're not just talking about those that are identified right now as experiencing homelessness, we're also talking about those youth and young children who have ever experienced homelessness. But then we also know that many children, with intervening experiences and support and other things, other programs or other support systems, really show resilience of young children experiencing homelessness.
Okay, so when we think about supporting young children experiencing homelessness, we have to go back to the McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act and think about how we are identifying, how we're serving students, really kind of what that means. So just to kind of give an overview of McKinney-Vento, again, this is not new information for you. We know that you know this, but in the context of early childhood and young children, we just want to make sure that it's clear that this is still a really important piece and that students are still eligible for services under McKinney-Vento, even though they are young children. So the McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act, as you know, the main themes are identification, school stability, school enrollment, support for academic success, and child-centered best interest decision-making. So again, this is the federal law that was reauthorized under ESSA in 2015, and it ensures that children experiencing homelessness have access to the same public education and related services as their permanently housed peers. So what that means for young children is access to those early education programs. So the term homeless children and youth means children who lack fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence. So again, when you're thinking about identifying young children experiencing homelessness, it goes back to what we think about when we identify any family experiencing homelessness, and really looking at their situation and what their situation is related to fixed, regular, and adequate. So again, fixed housing is stationary, permanent, not subject to change. Regular is housing that's predictable on a consistent routine basis. And then adequate is really a space that is sufficient for meeting physical and psychological needs typically met in a home environment. So making sure there's things like running water, electricity, a safe place to sleep, things like that. And it's important to know that HUD defines homelessness differently. So when we get major reports that come out from the federal government about ending homelessness, they're using the HUD definition, which does not include children who are doubled up. So it's important to think about kids in the context of what that means under McKinney-Vento and know that there's a difference, that when you see those numbers regarding shelters and regarding housing, that's not including the majority of the students that we're seeing in the state who are doubled up. So educational rights under McKinney-Vento are the same for young children experiencing homelessness. They have the right to immediate enrollment, transportation, free school meals, referrals to other services, and the right to remain in their school of origin or attend a school of residence. So this is true for all public schools K-12, but also for any public school administered preschool, 4K, or early childhood programs. And we do want to just say that there's work being done with agencies and programs like Head Start, the Child Care Block Grant, and other programs to really use the same definition of McKinney-Vento. However, there are different requirements about identifying and reporting. But services continue while the child is homeless. So while the child is experiencing homelessness, they have these rights until the end of the academic year in which they become permanently housed, or as long as they continue to be homeless. So specifically to preschool, when the McKinney-Vento Act was reauthorized in October of 2015, they added language specifically addressing preschool to really emphasize that in the changes to the law. So educational rights under McKinney-Vento apply to children in any district administered preschool program. And they can remain in the preschool they attended when last permanently housed, or the preschool in which they were last enrolled in attending, so as their school of origin. Again, that's just any public school administered program, but it could be a public school program administered at a Head Start or administered at a community child care site, as long as it is a district administered program. And this does include the right to receive transportation, even if transportation is not typically provided. So I think that's a really important thing to kind of keep in mind. I know a lot of 4K sites and other early education programs, early childhood programs don't always provide transportation, but that cannot be a barrier for a young child experiencing homelessness to attend those programs. And again, it does apply to any Head Start programs that are administered by the district.
So we know that it can be a little complicated with how even district administered preschool programs work. So there's often an overlap or intersection between programs and funding sources, and we do get questions of this child's attending, this program, and do they fall under McKinney-Vento or not? So some different things to be thinking about is that a child might receive itinerant services through the school district, but at a location that isn't part of the school district. It might be at a non-district funded Head Start or a private preschool program, but the district is providing services for that young child. So these things all come into play. A district might fund 4K at a Head Start site or a preschool location, but not 3-year-old kindergarten. So again, it's just key to determine what's in the best interest of the child and family when determining where and how services will continue under McKinney-Vento. So if it's itinerant services at a program that's not fully funded by the district, or the rest of the young children attending that program are not part of the district, it could be that those services would need to continue under McKinney-Vento since that student is receiving services through the district. But it could look different based on the best interest of the child, how those services are provided, to ensure that that young child receives those services still through being identified under McKinney-Vento. So again, looking at best interest, we know there's a lot of intersection between how programs are run and funded, but really looking at that best interest of the child when making a determination for services. So as Karen mentioned, when McKinney-Vento was reauthorized under ESSA, there were more provisions around early childhood and serving young children. In September of 2016, Head Start also came out with their new program performance standards, and those include requirements to support children experiencing homelessness as well. One of the key points of this is that they've adopted the McKinney-Vento definition of homeless. So when we're working with young children, regardless of which program they're attending, each Head Start and school district programs would be using that same definition of homeless, which streamlines things a little bit at least, and makes it a little more clear of which children are eligible for services. So any child that's experiencing homelessness is categorically eligible for Head Start and early Head Start. So again, there's different requirements for Head Start with their program performance standards that aren't exactly the same as the services that are required for students under McKinney-Vento. But Head Start must make efforts to maintain the child's enrollment regardless of that transition, or they may transition the child to another program just according to the family's needs with that move. And then Head Start programs must allow children to attend for up to 90 days without immunization records or other required documents. So again, kind of that immediate enrollment piece. And then Head Start programs must utilize community resources to provide transportation if transportation is a barrier to attendance. So that one's a little bit different than the McKinney-Vento Act for students in a public school. They should make every effort to provide transportation, however. And then also in September of 2016, the Child Care and Development Fund also came out with final regulations. They also adopted the McKinney-Vento definition of homeless. And so this would be for programs that receive federal funding for child care. And again, there are some requirements for the state then to prioritize homeless children for child care services, establish grace periods for enrollment, again, immediately enrolling, getting children into safe child care situations, for the state to use funds on enrollment, outreach, and training around homelessness, and also to collect data on children experiencing homelessness. So we know that some of these pieces are still being worked on at the state level, but just know that when we're talking about young children across the state in different programs, we are at least able to use that same McKinney-Vento definition of homelessness.
So students enrolled in early childhood special ed programs who are provided services through an itinerant service delivery model, like we mentioned earlier, have educational rights through McKinney-Vento as well. The child find component of this really comes down to communities having an informed referral network. So that means having community providers, community partners, organizations like WIC and social services agencies really understanding the screening process for children so that if they are eligible for services under IDEA Part B or Part C, that those referrals are made in a timely fashion. And these partnerships really provide an opportunity for families to learn about those those child development screenings and about other community resources. So we know that districts have an obligation to identify and serve children who are eligible for special education, and that really includes students who are experiencing homelessness, and that child find piece is really important for those particular students. Under IDEA Part C, the birth to 3 early intervention, the same child find requirements are in place that local agencies need to identify and serve students with disabilities, even children experiencing homelessness. So county agencies or whoever the entity is that's providing the early intervention service has to have policies and practices in place to serve those students who are from traditionally underserved or marginalized groups. That includes children that are experiencing homelessness. So we need to make an effort to include all of those children in our child find practices.
So we wanted to share some research around young children experiencing homelessness. There's a partnership through UW-Madison, a professor there named Dr. Travis Wright, and the Madison Metropolitan School District, where they've been doing some research around how children in 4K are experiencing homelessness, how it affects their education and things like that. So I would like to invite Janie Keister from the Madison Metropolitan School District to jump on and just kind of talk through that program a little bit.
Hi, thanks for the invitation. Can you hear me? Hello?
Hi, Jenny. You're really quiet.
Okay. See if I can. Is that better?
Not really.
I don't know how to make it any louder.
No, I can't hear you, Jenny. Sorry.
Okay, sorry. I don't know. I don't know what to do to make this louder for you guys.
I'm sorry, Jenny. We're having a really hard time hearing you.
No, I don't know what to do. Can you hear me now?
We can a little bit. I'm sorry. I don't know why it's kind of, you're kind of fading out.
I don't know how to make it louder without yelling.
Okay.
Danny, do you want to join by phone and we'll keep talking and then you can jump on when you're on the phone?
Okay.
All right. So I'm just going to give an overview. We really wanted Jenny to be able to talk through it because she works so closely with the program and is very involved in this. But just kind of a real quick overview. The university did a comprehensive evaluation of the MMSD 4K program, again, to understand the impact on children experiencing homelessness within 4-year-old kindergarten, and that transition as well. So what they found was that children experiencing homelessness are half as likely to participate in the Madison 4K program as their permanently housed peers, which really kind of starts off the achievement gap, in particular between children experiencing homelessness and their peers if they're not attending that 4K program. Children experiencing homelessness in 4K or kindergarten performed lower than children from low-income households on all measures in kindergarten. And I think that's something that we really want to highlight. This is real research. It's not just national numbers or other numbers throughout the state, but one really specific, one specific school district in our state that they're finding those achievement gaps between children experiencing homelessness and low-income peers. We just really want to stress that just because a family is experiencing homelessness doesn't mean that they should be kind of lumped in with those low-income children, because there is more going on, and that children experiencing homelessness really do need extra help. So in the study, 60% of children were identified as experiencing homelessness, or 60% of the children identified as experiencing homelessness were homeless for 1 year or less, and 25% were homeless for 1 to 2 years. And I think that's really important because it really does show what we mentioned earlier of that if you've ever been homeless, not just experiencing homelessness currently, but if a child has ever been homeless, that really still plays an impact on their academic achievement.
Okay, Jenny, it sounds like maybe you are good to go now. Do you want to jump in and talk more about this?
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yep, go ahead.
All right. So the research that Travis did, like I said, was.
Okay, hang on, Jenny. Now we're losing you again.
Can you give me the phone number to call?
I'm sorry, Jenny. We still can't hear you well. So again, with this research, the longer a child experienced homelessness, the lower their attendance rate was, the lower their PAL scores were, and the higher their behavior infractions were as they moved on into first grade and second grade. So even if a child was homeless for 1 year or less, it impacted their PAL scores. And one thing that we thought was really interesting when we heard Dr. Travis Wright talk about this research is he also mentioned that teachers that were interviewed in 4K spoke mostly about providing physical and socio-emotional needs for children that were experiencing homelessness, because we know those things are needed as well for these children, but only a few discussed the academic needs. And I think that's, again, that's one thing that we do want to make everyone aware of, is that there are academic needs as well for children experiencing homelessness. And of course, providing all of the physical things that students need and those emotional needs for students is really important too. But trying to get to that academic piece is very important.
Okay, sorry. So just to kind of bring back that data piece, you know, Christine talked about the data from Dr. Wright's study. And so we just want to share that after we heard this information from Dr. Wright, we really wanted to know how that held true statewide. So we looked at data available to us from districts in Wisconsin and looked at that early childhood 4K kind of kindergarten readiness data that we had. And like Christine said, when we think about students experiencing homelessness, they tend to kind of be lumped into that category of economically disadvantaged students. But our data statewide in Wisconsin really shows that there are more discrepancies between economically disadvantaged students and students experiencing homelessness. So it really is important to keep that in mind. So the gaps are not only between non-economically disadvantaged students and economically disadvantaged students, but there's also a significant discrepancy between economically disadvantaged students and those experiencing homelessness. So even with the same cohort of students from 4K to kindergarten, the gaps are wider between students experiencing homelessness. So it's that kindergarten readiness and really the access to early childhood programming is how that's affected. And so students that are not accessing early childhood education programs like 4K or like other early childhood programs really come into kindergarten less ready than their permanently housed peers and than their peers that are economically disadvantaged but not experiencing homelessness. So it's not just about poverty, but homelessness really compounds the impact on academic achievement.
And we really encourage you as districts, as you know, as a district-sponsored early childhood program, to really be looking at that data for your own district and really seeing where gaps exist for children experiencing homelessness, and potentially what can be done about it. So we're going to now get into some strategies.
Actually, I think we might have Janny on the phone now. Janny, are you there? Maybe not. Okay, we'll keep working on this. Okay, so thinking about strategies, and this was a question that came up in the chat box toward the beginning of the webinar. Oh, I think we've got Janny. Janny, are you there?
Can you hear me?
Now we can hear you. All right, go ahead, and then we'll start in on our strategies.
Okay, so you did a great job doing an overview of his work, so thank you for that. What I would add is the one thing that Travis really found in his research that I find really compelling is that when you experience homelessness, compounds the effects of homelessness years down the line. And so experiencing it as a 3-year-old or a 4-year-old means that you're going to have repercussions of it academically and socially as a 2nd grader, as a 3rd grader, that it doesn't mean that if we take care of it in the moment, that it's not going to go away. We can support it and we can do anything we want with it, but the research that he did says that we have to continue supporting these kids even after they're done experiencing homelessness, because the compounding effect of homelessness at the age that they experience it affects them as they're even older. And that was a really big finding from that research that I thought was important to make sure that people also heard. That experiencing homeless as a 3-year-old means we might still need to support them when they're in middle school because of the effect of how old they were when they experienced homelessness. In fact, what he would say is that a 4-year-old who experiences homelessness and a 2nd grader, and looking at scores in 2nd grade, that a 4-year-old who's experienced homelessness in 2nd grade will do worse than a 2nd grader who's currently experiencing homelessness. That make sense?
Yeah, that's great, Janny. Thank you so much for sharing that information.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you want to add for us?
No, you did a really good job on all the other pieces. He did share his research with us, and I did share that with you. So if people want to see more of that, there's so much in there. It takes some time to kind of delve through it, but the pieces that he sent were the summary pieces, so they're a little easier to dig into.
Sounds good. Thanks so much for jumping on with us, Janny, and sorry about all the technical issues that we had. Let's jump into talking about strategies, because I think this was a question that came up toward the beginning of the webinar, and this is really something that is really most important when we think about kind of the pieces of early childhood and young children experiencing homelessness. So this is the concrete, what can we do, right? So the first strategy, we adapted these from some information that was sent via Schoolhouse Connection, and added to it and kind of made them our own, but it comes from Schoolhouse Connection's website. So we'll share that link with you as well. So the first strategy is really collaborating for success. And it really is all about relationships. So McKinney-Vento liaisons in districts should intentionally make contact with early care and education programs and communities. So that could be, connecting with local Head Starts. That could be making sure that, 4K programs or early childhood special education programs know who the homeless liaison is and are trained on McKinney-Vento, know who to contact if there's a concern about a child. And just the relationships are key. It's the working together to support students. And then the liaison really should intentionally be joining the meetings that are happening. So making sure that the right people are at the table to be talking about supporting young children experiencing homelessness. That might include the homeless liaison joining in with meetings that happen when discussing child find and outreach for child find, or setting up 4K registration and how to reach out to families who have eligible students but might be either highly mobile or experiencing homelessness, sharing housing, and really being intentional about bridging those gaps between people that are working with the students as teachers or administrators and working with the homeless liaison. And then it's really important to connect to shelters and other programs in the community to make sure that those students have access to and know about school programming. So whether that means hanging something up at a shelter to make sure that families who come to stay at that shelter are aware of who to contact in the district if they have a child who might be eligible for 4K or something like that. Really just making sure that families know where to go to access those programs, and that there's that open communication between families and providers and the school district. It's important to think about sharing data on the number of families and children experiencing homelessness across programs and providers in order to make sure that you're really accessing and providing services for the number of kids that you have that might be experiencing homelessness. So talk about your data. Talk about what that might look like for students who are in early childhood programming.
And that's really, when we talked about Child Find, that's really what that informed referral network is all about those relationships with community partners. Because at the school level, you might not know where some of those families are spending their time, but you know, the WIC provider or other providers in your community may have that information and may be the connecting point for those families and the local LEA.
So going on to strategy 2 around preparing staff and systems. So we know that the reality of homelessness can make it difficult for families to comply with some of those standard policies that early care or school or education programs may have. So they might struggle with having all their documentation ready, all those things that are typically required for enrollment. We know that children might arrive late or early, they might not have their backpack that day, they might not have eaten breakfast that morning. So think of the small things that make a big difference as a student or young child is coming into your program in the morning. Just really, really simple things. When a student arrives late, say, "We're so glad you made it today," instead of reprimanding them for being tardy. You know, if possible, create spaces within your program area or in your school where parents can come if there's a computer that they can use, just a family center, or if there's a washer and dryer that families can use, would really be helpful, and are just some small things that may help.
And I just want to say one thing that Travis Wright had shared at the presentation that we first heard him at has really made a big difference and really been impactful to me. And so I just want to share that as a strategy. He talked a lot about, you know, we have students who are coming into programs, whether it's 4K programs or even entering kindergarten programs, and they might be highly mobile. They might, you know, if they're experiencing homelessness, there might be a lot of things happening at home. And kids come into school on Monday mornings, and typically the first question we ask is, "How was your weekend?" And we know that for a lot of our students that are in homeless situations, they might not have had a very good weekend, right? And so Dr. Wright shared, think about things that you can do as like a classroom or school community that would make a difference for those kids. So one thing he shared was like a class that at the beginning of Monday morning, the class takes a nature walk together, or they take a walk through the school, and then when they get sitting down in their shared time, they're talking about those things. So what did you notice when you were outside? What did you notice when we were walking through this particular area of the school? So they have that shared experience to talk about in their morning time together, rather than relying on those weekend experiences that aren't always positive for students who may be in homeless situations. And so, you know, I think when you're thinking of the small things that make a big difference, something like that is a really small thing that you can do in the big scheme of things that's going to give students experiencing homelessness a shared experience with their peers, so that when they have something to say on a Monday morning, it's something that they can relate to with their peers and that they can talk about with their peers. That's a positive thing that will help them to really feel connected.
And then another piece is to prepare staff to understand and also respond to the needs of families and children experiencing homelessness. So, and one thing that is part of the homeless liaison role is to provide training on homelessness for all staff. I think a lot of you know that, and a lot of you do that if you're the homeless liaison, but then really thinking about, are you reaching all of those individuals that you should be? If your district has community 4K sites, are you ensuring you're also hitting those staff members to train them on homelessness? Maybe it's reaching out to other child care providers or other Head Start locations that aren't administered by the district, but still training staff around homelessness and what they can be looking for, because they're going to become your children at some point. And then work as a team to meet the needs of children and families. So again, making sure that someone is identifying children experiencing homelessness, that as referrals come into a homeless liaison and students are being identified, that data is being reported and the needs of families are understood, so those needs can be met in a way. I think another important piece, again, around just preparing staff too, is to help transportation providers understand the reality of homelessness and mobility, and their importance as transportation providers in making sure children can access services. So if they notice something, a child getting off the bus at a different stop, or maybe there's a special bus that you send because you need to pick up a student that's experiencing homelessness in another district. Not that they would know that that child is homeless, but just a training for all transportation providers to understand the realities of homelessness.
So along the lines of training, that brings us to our third strategy of streamlining enrollment and participation. And I think the training piece is the most important piece of this. So cross-training staff and service providers is really key to be able to have the enrollment and screening process for programs to be as smooth as possible for families to access. So when you're thinking about kids coming into early childhood programming or to 4K, making sure that not only does your enrollment office know and understand, but your 4K teachers, your 4K administrators, your special education program staff, everybody is aware of what the enrollment guidelines are under McKinney-Vento, that those kiddos can come in and enroll right away and get access to programming right away because of their living situation. So, so it's really important to make sure that you've got kind of that streamlined process. And it also helps to make like a single point of entry for those so that families know that they can reach out to the liaison to get enrolled immediately to access programming. And they don't have to kind of call around figuring out how to best to do that. Calling a 4K site or calling an early childhood program and then reaching out to the liaison and then going to the enrollment office. Really streamline that and make it as easy as possible for families to access those programming. And then along those same lines, provide training on screening tools. So whether that's screening tools for programming or screening tools that you have for identifying students under McKinney-Vento, it's really making sure that people understand what that process is and how to make sure that families have access as easily as possible so that it's not a barrier to get into programming. So again, it's making those connections. So a district liaison could provide housing questionnaires and school enrollment forms to early childhood community programs at shelters, wherever there might be young children that need to get connected to programming. Child care providers connect to the people in your community that know where those kiddos might be, and then talk about accessing those programs. And Head Start and preschool programs can share their applications and contact McKinney-Vento liaisons immediately when they have an opening. So connect to those Head Start programs as well. It really is about bridging those gaps in your communities and making sure that you're reaching out to the right people and having those conversations. And then make information and applications as accessible as possible. So maybe that means they're both online, something that would be accessible on a cell phone. Maybe it's having hard copies as well. And then create a single source of contact information for programs. So there is a document that will be linked in this PowerPoint the PowerPoint will be posted on our website after our webinar today. So there's a link in here to use as a guide. It's called the Pathways to Partnerships. And it just really goes through what those pieces are to build those connections. It's addresses McKinney-Vento liaisons, child care resources, Head Start and Early Head Start, preschool, early intervention, early childhood special education programs, and just kind of talks about how to get all of those contacts in one place for families. And then post the information online, post it in schools and public locations. As part of your responsibilities as the liaison, you have to be building community awareness anyway. So it's also a great idea to include early childhood programming in that community awareness. So if you're hanging posters in your community for families to access resources and access the liaison that are in K-12 programming, add on to that to include early childhood and early childhood programs. And then just be sure the contact information will connect parents to a person who can answer questions and provide assistance. We know that sometimes calling phone numbers can lead in an automated system from one place to another, and that's not going to really help families to feel connected and able to access those programs right away. And so just eliminating those barriers. And then using person-first language is really important. To talk about families experiencing homelessness versus saying that it's a homeless family. So it's a way to talk about families in a way that's respectful and really make sure that it's families, talk about the family first and then their situation of experiencing homelessness. As part of the strategy as well, share information appropriately to expedite services. So at the time of enrollment, it's always a great idea to get a release of information so you can talk to other programs that the family may have participated in and connect to other places that that family may have accessed. Then with the family's permission, collect information that will streamline their enrollment in other programs. So for example, if a family is looking for childcare subsidy as well, get the family's permission, work with them to get connected to maybe a childcare subsidy or where they can reach out to find childcare and really work to bridge that gap with the referrals. Again, referrals are part of the role of the liaison anyway, so that also includes young children experiencing homelessness to make sure that you're bridging those gaps for families with young children as well. And then establish a system where shelters provide information daily about current residents and whether there's young children or school-aged children. So typically we hear that shelters will have contacts with the school for kids that come in, again, in that K-12 range. But we really want to make sure that shelters are also aware of families that have early childhood age kiddos or 4K age kiddos that they know exactly who to contact in the district and exactly how to connect those students so that young children have access to programming right away as well.
Moving into strategy 4 is really all about working with families. So being able to connect families to services they may need quickly and effectively. So ask parents if they have school-aged children, or if you're enrolling a student into K-12, ask them if they have younger children in the home, and offer to connect them to folks that they need to be connected to. Like Karen said, a lot of just streamlining some of that enrollment practices and ensuring that you know who to contact if a family does have a young child, so they're able to also access childcare or Head Start or early Head Start services. You can connect parents with childcare resources and other referral programs, information lines like 211, or if you have a community resource guide, ensure that there's information in that guide about early childhood programs or childcare programs in your community as well. Another strategy is to combine resources to provide services to families where they are. If someone from the school is able to visit shelters with resources from many different programs, so families can receive all of that information at one time, providing them with information about screening and referrals. And then working both ways with schools sharing information from early childhood programs and early childhood sharing information about school programs. Again, just ensuring that there's a system with all of your partners to be able to provide that information to families. So whichever program that family comes into, they're still able to access the wide net of resources in your community. And then build relationships with families together across programs, understanding and accommodating the real stressors and trauma that parents are experiencing and that the children are experiencing. So one idea is to do joint meetings. If a homeless liaison or a school social worker or school counselor can be a representative at meetings to facilitate a children's transition into kindergarten, that would be really helpful. Just so there's that communication right away that yes, this child is experiencing homelessness, or this child previously experienced homelessness, and ensure that their needs are being met then coming into K-12. Or liaisons or a social worker or school counselor could bring resources with them to meetings with the families, providing them with any needed supplies that they might need, or just sharing information with them as well. And then being flexible, which I'm sure a lot of you are with families all the time, but just considering the hours of the day that someone's answering a phone, is someone available, after kind of typical work hours, Is someone available to meet a family where they're at, location-wise, or on a day or time that works best for them? And we know that that may not be the easiest thing to accomplish, but I think that goes back to then having those partnerships with your community on maybe it's not one person from the school or from the Head Start program going out, but it could be another program provider that's available at those times and can reach out to the family or meet with the family and still be able to provide the information about your program or your school or whatever early childhood programs that exist in your community. But again, that goes back to everybody being on the same page in your community and knowing what programs to refer families to.
Another important piece of this is really working with families regarding transportation and helping to facilitate transportation so that there's uninterrupted services for kiddos who might be mobile and moving around a lot. Even if there's not transportation provided for other students in a 4K program, for example, if you have a student experiencing homelessness and transportation is a barrier to attending, again, working with your transportation department and other people in the district as well as with the family to make sure that there's transportation to get that student to school. And I know one thing we think about when we think about getting kiddos involved in Head Start programming, for example, or district administered Head Start programs, there are often waiting lists. And it's not just a matter of the student comes in, needs to access programming, and immediately gets a spot in a Head Start program that's a district administered program, for example. So it's really prioritizing those students and putting them at the top of the waiting list. So just know that we understand that programs are sometimes full, especially Head Start programs. So prioritizing those students and families and putting them at the top of those waiting lists is a way to help them to access programming.
So the last line of information we have for you is really just thinking about what we've talked about today and how you can consider it for the work that you're already doing. So we encourage you to take these questions back to your team and really think about how you're serving young children experiencing homelessness. So what is your LEA or agency already doing to serve young children experiencing homelessness? How might the information shared change or affect the work that you're doing? What other resources or programs could you connect with to serve young children experiencing homelessness? And who in your district or community might benefit from having this information? Like Karen said, we'll post our PowerPoint slides to our website. There are a lot of links throughout. And definitely share the strategies that we've shared with you today.
So if anybody has any questions, I've been trying to field those a little bit as we've been going through the webinar. Hopefully I haven't missed anything, but if I did miss your question or if you have other questions and you want to post those in the chat, we can take a minute and just let anybody ask any questions that they might have. Oh, so we had a question about any books to add into an early childhood classroom. And I don't necessarily have any specific books in my head, but I will say that we have recently seen that Sesame Street has come out with some resources about students experiencing homelessness. And while I haven't looked at all of them, the ones that I've seen have been really excellent. So you can access those through Schoolhouse Connection, and I will type their link into the chat box in just a second. Schoolhouse Connection has links on their website to some of those resources from Sesame Street. And it seems kind of like, okay, we're talking about Sesame Street, right? But they've really done a lot of work very intentionally around having conversations about homelessness and understanding homelessness for young children. So I just really cannot highly recommend that resource enough to get conversations started and even to provide to children in an early childhood or 4K classroom to kind of facilitate some of those conversations.
And they do have their resources in English and Spanish.
Yes, and they are excellent. Okay, there is a question about suggestions regarding getting in contact with potentially homeless parents. So I would say regarding early childhood students, use the same kind of processes that you have with other families. So think about your enrollment forms when a family comes in to register. Is there a space on your enrollment forms or on your residency questionnaire that asks if there are other young children or there are non-school age kids in the home or in the family? And so that you can intentionally like be asking the questions to know who you should be contacting. But then, you know, it's similar to other families that sometimes families come in to enroll and then they may move again right away and they may be out of your district and you may not be able to get a hold of them. But I would say if you're doing outreach in the places where families might be frequenting, that's probably the best way to do that. If you have 4K open house registration, something like that, be there at those events to be able to address any families who may be experiencing homelessness and their barriers to accessing those programming.
So someone asked, who do we contact if there's a school that does not immediately enroll a homeless student in their district? We really encourage homeless liaisons to connect with each other and talk with each other. So if you know of a student who is moving and wants to immediately enroll in their district of residence, you could reach out and talk with that other homeless liaison. So we really encourage you to start there, or another person in the district perhaps, but definitely start with the homeless liaison, since that is, every district has a designated person for that role. There's another question about many teachers do not know how to connect or how to ask children if they are experiencing homelessness. I think we would encourage that teachers are not the ones necessarily identifying students experiencing homelessness. If a teacher or another staff member has an idea that a student may be experiencing homelessness, that they should put in a referral to the homeless liaison to follow up with those questions. We do have sample questions to ask about living situations on our DPI website that could be helpful in making a determination of if a family or a student is experiencing homelessness or not. But again, we would really encourage that you have either points of contact in your building making the identification, or that referrals go to the homeless liaison.
And Clara did just post that sample questions document. So there's a link in the chat box to that as well. So a question came in about, let me go back and look at this here, federal funding for childcare. And the question is, are you referring to the LEA providing or paying for childcare or the vouchers we referred to? So when we talk about childcare, it's helping families to access those programming. So states, especially Wisconsin, have childcare subsidy programs. So for example, if there is a family that comes into an early childhood education program, maybe it's an early childhood special education program that's only a few hours a day, and the family is then looking for childcare for a full day, helping to bridge that gap and maybe connecting to a childcare subsidy from the state. So we're not talking about paying for childcare for a family, but just making those referrals to places in the community where they could access childcare. So it's knowing, you know, in Dane County, we have an office called 4C, and they have a list of childcare providers. It's maybe helping a family connect there to get childcare, helping them figure out who to contact to apply for childcare subsidy. So not doing that as the district, but making those referrals.
And then a question we have, if a family has children split between districts, does McKinney-Vento allow for these children to all attend the same district, even if some of the children did not attend the district of origin when homelessness occurred? So no, a student has rights to attend their school of origin. If they're residing in another district, they can you know, go back to the other district to continue in their school of origin. But if a young child hasn't attended school or been enrolled in the district, then they would need to enroll where they're residing. McKinney-Vento talks about school of origin and it being in the best interest of those students that have a school of origin. But if a student does not have a school of origin, then they would need to enroll where they're residing.
We just got a question about, is there a brochure that is beneficial to be handed out to community members? We have a number of brochures from districts on our website. On our example forms tab on our homeless website. And thanks, Clara, for just linking that in there. So you can definitely check out brochures. Those brochures, those are a great resource. And the ones that are posted, we do have permission from those districts for you to use those. So feel free to take them and modify them to meet the needs of your district and your community. The other thing I would say is that the NCHE website, which is the National Center for Homeless Education, has posters that are available to use for free. So you can go to their website and order those posters to hang in your communities to help build awareness too. So that gives the rights of McKinney-Vento and then the contact information for the district liaison.
All right, so to honor everybody's time, we'll wrap up since we don't have other questions. We do have some resources listed here in the PowerPoint slide. A lot of the organizations that we talked about, Schoolhouse Connection, the National Association for the Education of Homeless Children and Youth, or NACE, and the National Center for Homeless Education, NCHE. We specifically linked all of these organizations' early childhood resources for you, but in general, those websites and those resources are really great for a lot of different information. We also have our contact information, myself, Christine, Karen Rice, and Sarah McFarland. We just want to thank you all so much for joining us this morning. Hope you learned some new things and have some strategies to take back with you to your district or program.
And again, this webinar will be posted, the recording of it will be posted on our website along with the PowerPoint. So thank you, everybody.